Well, good afternoon, everybody and investors. Welcome to our May 24th, 2022 edition of Bull Sessions. My name is Mark Robertson. I'm coming to you from an unusual computer using unusual software and different microphones. So if the sound quality is a little bit substandard, I apologize for that. It will be fixed within a few days or so when my computer, which is returning independently from Gettysburg from me, arrives here. But this afternoon we are joined by Ken Kavula. He's back from his side trip. Good afternoon, Ken.
Good afternoon, everybody. Glad to be back. Had quite a drive yesterday for it rained throughout Tennessee and Kentucky and then turned beautiful in Ohio. And by the time we got to Michigan, the temperature was 25 degrees lower than it was when we started in Tennessee.
Cool. And we actually have two wonderful special guests here today, Len Douglas and Matt Spielman, both of whom have served in high-ranking roles. They were honchos for automotive companies, and they're also very well-known individual investors and educators. So Len and Matt, welcome to both of you.
Thank you, Mark. Sorry you're suffering your own supply chain issues or technical issues, whichever way you want to call it.
Well, I think it's all self-inflicted. All right, so I thought we'd talk a little bit about cannonballs. Go ahead, Len, if you're going to chime in.
Well, I was just seconding Matt's comment about your cross the bear there.
All right, so it's good to have you guys. One of the things that we want to cover today is at least an entree into electric vehicles and some of the wide-ranging topics that erupt from such a thing. I do want to talk a little bit about cannonballs because, Ken, you missed that one. You want to see our slide. The bear still applies, although we're doing better on best small companies. We will talk about that. We're also going to talk about, I doubled down on my tequila trade. Want to let everybody know about that. But the major topic this afternoon will be this notion of homing on the electric range. We find that the number one concern that most people have when they deal with electric vehicles is the range of that vehicle, the number of miles it can travel. Believe it or not, it's actually the number one fear that drivers have of basically running out of gas with a conventional, traditional car. So we will go into those areas, including an exploration of, at least a brief exploration of the reality that the electric vehicle was first, which I find kind of fascinating. And anything any of you guys want to add to that from 35,000 feet?
Is that the truth, Mark? Or I've always thought that the steam vehicle was first, but maybe it is the electric vehicle being first.
Well, the steam was first, but it failed very quickly.
Well, exactly, yeah. It was the first failure, yeah.
Yep. All right, let's go ahead and proceed. Assuming that I can figure out how to do that with this new machine, and I'm all over the place here. Just real quickly, no investment recommendation is intended. This is an educational demonstration. We are here illustrating basically the concept of a theme leading to opportunity as generally practiced by practitioners in the modern investment club movement. You're going to hear opinions from us. Please do your own homework before making any investment decision. If we own something, we'll try to remember to admit that. The roundtable will be a week from today. If you'd like to be added to a reminder list for that event, that is a monthly webcast where we do a fairly similar presentation but focused on the analysis of 4 or 5 discrete opportunities. Please send an email to nkavula1@comcast.net. By the way, the internal rate of return on that tracking portfolio, now up to almost 12 years, is 16%, 12 years since inception. If you'd like, if you have follow-up questions or would like copies of the slides or whatever, there are 2 email addresses there at the bottom, mark@manifestinvesting.com and kkavula1@comcast.net. So with that, let's go ahead and kick off. I did have a slide in here to once again celebrate Kim Butcher, who's unable to join us today, and Diane also is under the weather. So we'll just send this off into the ether and just say that we appreciate nurses. And Ken, we did cover Stryker fairly extensively last week as part of the last week's session. All right, just real quickly, I wanted to cover our standing topics, basically because this one's a little more outstanding here recently. We have actually gained ground on the general stock market with our active portfolio. All of the metrics are basically, with the exception of the total stock market, which hovers around bear market levels, everything else is in a deep bear market. And Ken, I'd like to draw your attention to the right-hand side. That relative return is turning greener. And that's good news. We're basically seeing fairly decent catch-up performance. I'm not going to say any more. I don't want to jinx anything.
Are we going to take a serious look, market sharps? What do you think?
I have taken a serious look, and the answer to your question is yes. I ended up with lower margin expectations, and it's a little bit more of a lukewarm opportunity as a result of reconditioning. You know, you take away some of the froth of expectation of what happened with the pandemic response, and basically go back and look at the operating levels over the years, and it basically becomes a little bit less exciting an opportunity, even at that reduced stock price. So we'll be raking that one over the coals.
How about the Irobot? Same thing?
Same thing. I think that's just basically a global economic, lagging situation. And it's also very much supply chain related also.
Well, and I guess with inflation, it's one of the things you might tick off your list first as far as necessities to buy. So, yeah.
And I will say that we should be most grateful that the banks, the banks and some of those housing firms like Green Brick Partners are holding their own pretty well, but the banks are kind of hovering near the top of the list, with one exception.
Some very thoughtful analysis today on CNBC about the big banks and about the fact that there's more and more folks that feel that the big banks have bottomed, a couple of them trading at book value or below book value. So that is always good for me to see if you're a fan of the banks as I am. So we'll keep our eye on what's going on with those.
I did do some consumer support for Boston Beer this weekend on our weekend at Gettysburg. So hopefully we did enough to make a difference. No, we didn't do enough to make a difference. I had two beers, Ken.
I bought a case for a party we're having this coming weekend, Mark. So we'll have to see whether the fruit flavored stuff goes over very well. Okay.
And the one other one I would mention here, and that goes with Ken's banks a little bit. It's a friskier bank, Axos Financial. That's probably a pretty decent study, I would think, under current day conditions. Just an opinion. All right. Quick look at the Groundhog, just to make the point that things are still a mess. In a messy market, Hebner and Einhorn seem to do well. Herb is up there at the very top as the top performing individual with his pretty defensive portfolio that was immaculately timed, and a whole bunch of pretty good names on there. I do like the fact that Kurt's on there at number 30, and some of the usual prospects on here, along with a few new names. We're still having a rough year.
That monkey is still holding tight at number 6, isn't it?
That's just because we admitted that would annoy us, and the great humiliator is cooperating greatly.
Absolutely, I do notice that Psy is moving up into the just off the list, and I'm moving up just off the list. So I hope by the time next February rolls around, the two of us at least will be rolling onto the bottom of the list, if not up towards the middle.
And I continue to hope that Kathy and I will catch fire.
Okay.
All right. Here's the fun we had last week with the cannonball, and just the reality that I think that the market can behave, like a constructive interference on a wave pattern, Ken. And that just thought we would share that with you. We did have people write and ask whether that was Mark or Ken diving into the pool there. And I advised everyone it was neither of the two of us. But I do think that this is a reality, that you get these disruptions, and we certainly are facing a number of disruptions even today with what's going on in the world place and the economies. And just an interesting, I think, just kind of an interesting way to think about things, and how we've basically seen these type of responses in a variety of ways. And I think the Fed, once again, was late to catching on to this. So we shall see.
We'll have to pull out the old Ripple tanks, Mark, and put them on top of an overhead projector and show this stuff in actually happening,
Well, I was thinking you and I could do a dunk tank in Dallas, maybe.
No, I'm just doing a Ripple tank, Mark. That's has
All right.
nothing to do with moving the body into another body of water. Okay.
All right. Scratch that idea. And some volunteer will overhear that and they'll be working on it.
Yeah, I know.
All right. So let's keep going. Here's a quick look at the market as defined by that value line arithmetic average, the green bars. We will be locking in the next green bar and adding the next green bar within the next 5 weeks. And if we continue in the mode that we're currently in, we will begin creating white space between the blue line and the green bars for the third or fourth time in the last 15 years. And that just basically says, as long as those red dots keep rising, you can see they're at relatively high levels, that we should be finding some opportunities. All right. Any highlights there, Ken, or should we press on?
I think we just press on, Mark.
All right. I've got a series of slides here, including another cannonball from the dude. These are actually from Ben Carlson. It's just a reminder of what the stock market generally does. And there's lots of big gains and a decent number of big losses. And the point to be made, and this is a theme that we've had for several weeks now, is just the mere fact that the price of a stock fluctuates much more dramatically and widely as its value. And that's the pendulum swinging in both ways on individual issues, sectors, and entire markets. So what you're looking at here basically shows you that annual losses don't happen all that often compared to annual gains. And they used to be, talking about almost 100 years ago now, much more frequent. What grabs you about this one, Ken, and that, for that matter, Len and Matt?
Well, I like the fact, Mark, that in most cases there's only a single bar moving down before it goes back to the top, or a lot of times a double bar. I'm only seeing 2 times in this entire period where we have more than 2 bars falling beneath the line. So there's always hope that it's going to turn itself around within the next 6 months, 12 months, 18 months. I like the chart, and you know how much I like the chart that shows the trailing 3 years for the S&P, or even better, the trailing 5 years for the S&P, which shows that there's virtually no 5-year period anywhere where the stock market loses money over that, where the S&P loses money over that time span. So it's an optimistic chart as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, and in a couple of slides, Ben Carlson is actually going to provide a variant that I think you're going to like also. Well, how about you, Len? You've been doing this a long time. What's your attitude during one down year? Len's probably muted. Hopefully.
There we go, Len. You're unmuted now, Len.
Okay. I was muted so I could cough.
You're cooking?
Oh, no, I think I'm still reacting to mowing the lawn.
There you
go. The grass clippings blowing in the wind. I'm sorry, I wasn't prepared to respond.
That's okay. That's okay. We're saving you up for later anyhow. I just thought you might share some perspective. How about here? This is basically I took this chart and basically wanted to point out that whenever I think about financial or investment history, a lot of times I'll block out anything that's older than 1941. So you can see that I basically whited that out here. And my whole premise is that that is the period where Benjamin Graham tried to bring some sanity to the field of stock analysis, and the SEC formed and the Investment Company Act formed. And the other gentleman there is Arnold Bernard. He was the founder of Value Line, and his book, The Evaluation of Common Stocks, is breathtaking, page-turning stuff. And anyhow, the early 1940s is where some of the Wild West was actually removed from the stock market. And you take those years out and now look at the picture, you see actually very few years, fairly widely spaced. I mean, we have 3 consecutive year period right around the turn of the century, that 2003 recession that we had, but everything kind of goes away. And the other point I wanted to make, and this kind of dovetails with the inflation theme, is look at those returns during one of the worst inflationary periods that this country has ever seen, in the green box. That was following remember the license where you had to get your license plate on even and odd days to gas up? That's why I put the don't mess with Texas. That's also in honor of Matt. Don't mess with Matt. Yeah, I just found it interesting. I know that it was one of the best periods for our community of investors, the 70s and early 80s, but I think that one captures it pretty well.
I think it's especially necessary, Mark, to move your eye across to the scale occasionally and remind yourself that a lot of these bars that don't look very high are in fact 20% returns, which we regard as exceptional, So, keep in mind that scale, because that scale is pointing out that there's some phenomenal returns going on there compared to not nearly as many phenomenal returns in the negative direction.
Of course, there is go ahead.
I have 2 thoughts when I look at that slide. The first is thank you for customizing it for my lifetime, because I was born in 1941.
Okay.
The second is the one that I was focusing on was that 3 down right around 2000 to 2003, because that's really where I first got involved with better investing. And the silver-tongued devil, stockbroker, talked me into moving about half of my 401k out to an external IRA so I could better manage it. And our timing was exceptional because we did it in like November of 1999. And everything went swimmingly for about the first 3 months. And then, but I will say the good news is he convinced me to abandon a total investment in the 401k in Ford stock.
Yeah, I would think Ford Plus Index Fund was probably not the best place to be at that particular point in time.
It took about the 3 years to get back to the starting point, but it still did better than a lot of the people who were, and I have to say, a lot of my coworkers were fully invested their entire kitty in company stock.
Ouch.
I'm going to pile on here, Mark, because that period that you have circled on the graph is the period that I retired in. And that's when I gained control of my 403B account, which had done meager returns over my entire work life, and which I could now start to manage. I have never had a negative year except for 2009 in my investing career, and that includes those 3 years you have circled. I was already a part of better investing at that point, and I was able to beat the S&P handily during that first beginning. If you remember one of the dashboards, I think it has number 4 in the slug that identifies the dashboards that are in Manifest. And I think Manifest dashboard number 4, which is one of my IRAs, demonstrated to me the power of manifest investing and the power of better investing when you put them together and use them as a tool, not only to buy stock, but to manage a portfolio. So I was luckier than most, but I think it was possible to beat the S&P during that down period of time. Not beat it by a whole heck of a lot, but beat it by enough that you might have turned into positive returns for a couple of those years.
Yeah, if you look at our Groundhog results for 2009, they were better. They were still down a little bit, but I also remember fairly vividly the conversation with Sam Stovall about that 2003 to 2005 timeframe, when we could point to so many people and clubs that didn't experience negative returns because of all of the above investing.
Yep.
You know, having enough medium and small companies, because this is literally just large companies, right? So good stuff. All right, and
well,
then
Mark, that 2009 period, Mark, was when we only had 2 or 3 groundhogs actually in positive territory.
Mm-hmm.
That's when we were still picking just 1 or 2 stocks. We weren't picking large numbers like we're picking in the groundhog contest today. And picking a single stock maybe in 2009 even. I'm thinking that mine was that PetsMed stock that I picked that happened to take off in 2009 and outperform everything for a while until it crashed.
Now you're going to make me go back and look up 2009. So, all right. So here's an interesting graph. Again, this is in the context of, especially for those of you in the audience that have not been through too many of these. These are the worst years ever for the U.S. stock market, as published by Ben Carlson. And I thought it was kind of interesting. He tagged, and I think this is a little better than what you hear on CNBC when they ask, why did the market go up today or down today? These are a little more macro than that, and I think they make a whole lot more sense. That 1937 crash is a fairly special moment or infamous moment. But you see war.
They also give us a 12-month percentage, Mark, not a 12-hour percentage of what the market's doing.
That's right. So those are the 10 worst years, and we're actually at, as we stand right now, even year to date, we're just beyond 2002. We're in the middle of that pack. And then the next slide is the one I think you'll like, Ken. It shows what then happens following the next year, next 3 years, and next 5 years. And this is where that longer term emphasis starts to really pan out. And to me, it's a nudge to get out there and shop carefully now.
Well, and I also think, Mark, it points out that buy and forget, because this is measured by an index that you can buy and forget in your portfolio. Buy and forget, while it's not going to give you the best returns over long periods of time, can give you returns that are pretty decent when it's all said and done.
All right, let's go ahead and keep moving on. All good. I think I'll just zip through these. This was shared by Kim just to make the point that investing in these tech companies 10 years ago, and by the way, my wife was among those first people with the Facebook IPO that's mentioned up here at the top. We have sold the position. I'm actually giving myself a little pat on the back that we did it right near the top, at least the temporary top in Facebook stock. But some pretty powerful performance from those 5 companies, and putting them in a annualized return perspective is pretty powerful there on the right also. And then just a quick comment that Amazon, Facebook, well, not Facebook so much as Microsoft and Google, all seem to be doing very well on the operating side. So again, just thinking back to that notion of the stock price being more volatile than the value of the company, I really think can come into play here. And then one last one, just to make the point that these companies are all continue to make progress, especially in their web services division. All right, now one last slide just to make a point of how ugly it's been for some of these, but they are down pretty dramatically. And then just a quick reminder that if you go away from some of those heavy market cap weightings at the top, some of those big losers, which account for a large portion of the losses in the market, investing in an all of the above portfolio, just like number 10 there, value line arithmetic average, is a very prudent way to be operating. And Ken, in your absence last week, I did put your Wilshire 5000 back in because it was giving you the heebie-jeebies down there at number 22.
That's an important one for us to watch, I think, Mark. Yeah.
Okay, so it's back in there now. We can see at a glance who's beating it and who's not. So again, the real message of this slide is invest in all of the above for your portfolio. All right, so let's launch into a discussion of electric vehicles. And I know Len and Matt have done a number of discussions on the Manifest Investing Forum. And I actually listened to the Freakonomics webcast on the way back from Gettysburg this weekend and learned a lot about this stuff. But, you know, one of the most highly sought after cars is there on the left, this Waverly Silent Electric. I believe it had a range of 30 or 35 miles. Can you fact check me on that, Matt or Len? Is that in the neighborhood?
Not familiar with it.
Yeah, I think they said it would go about 35 miles per hour and it had fewer working parts than the internal combustion engine. It was around in the 1890s. And it really was kind of that time when they were trying to figure out, you know, what type of vehicle would be carrying on.
So batteries could not be recharged at that point in history, right, Mark?
I don't think so. I think they were just disposing and replacing. I don't know.
So it was just a constant. That was your fuel. The battery was your fuel, and you just got rid of it when it didn't have any more power left in it. Okay.
Yeah, and this, you know, much like working on a toy for your children or grandchildren, I mean, you slap the batteries in and it runs until it dies. That's kind of what the situation was. And it didn't involve a whole lot of mechanical expertise. And that was kind of the dividing line. The engineers and the fix-it men and fix-it women are in the society were more inclined to have the internal combustion car, and that just had a whole lot more of mechanical stuff go with it. You had to be basically a fix-it person to drive one of those things. Whereas the electric car,
that was actually a big selling point, was not only mechanically simpler, because at the time, if you had an internal combustion car, one, it was a luxury. So then two, you could afford to hire the mechanic to ride along with you to help you when things happen. And that was quite common, but it was advertised as being noiseless and odorless too. As you don't have a lot, you know, you certainly didn't have catalytic converters. You didn't have a lot of pollution controls at all. A quick Googling says it was a 40-mile range at a blistering 14 miles an hour.
Nice.
I got a different stat. Google says the Pope Waverly had a 15 to 20 mile range equivalent to 1.5 hours.
Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting stuff. And of course, there's the return of that don't drive an empty, that fear that all of us have of running out of gas. Same thing is true as far as running out of battery power. And that first tricycle that you see up there in the upper right was from 1881. Keep in mind that is only 15 years after the Civil War, U.S. Civil War. and that is in Paris, and it's recognized as being the first electric car. Okay,
Yeah,
so
the 40 mile comes up as a 2006, pardon me, a 1906.
Oh, that can be.
all right, so here I would recommend, if you want to go a little bit deeper on how long these things have been around and some of the drivers that we're going to be talking about. By drivers, I mean the topical drivers and influences and themes. Freakonomics is a pretty good show, and the link to that series is on the upper right. And they did talk to Mary Barra about what people are thinking about, and again, that notion of running out of power and not being able to plug in anywhere is a major consideration. And they did this whole session on the best-selling car being electric and all of the stuff work. And the major influence behind getting something else to move down the streets is right there on display. And I can see where that would be highly motivational to maybe find a different way. Okay. All right. One of the things I thought we would do, and I really do kind of want to turn it over to Len and Matt, but this is from a presentation by the Stellantis, which is the new company behind Chrysler and Peugeot in France, combined to form Stellantis. And the Stellantis CEO was making a presentation at a recent World Automotive Conference at the FT Festival a few months ago. And it's been kind of a kumbaya moment for many of the automotive companies when it comes to electric vehicles. And I get it. I believe they're coming. I don't believe they're coming the day after tomorrow. But he actually went through and in a fairly controversial speech pointed out that, it's not a bed of roses. And these are some of the things that he pointed out about concerns over the raw materials. He asked questions like, what if you had all the lithium in the world? Because, by the way, the Chinese have a lot of it. But what if you had it all and it still wasn't enough? And of course, that's a big what if. And then, of course, the supply chain stuff that we're seeing, he believes that it's the tip of the iceberg. It's going to go well beyond the chips into some of the other stuff that's involved in the process. And then he made a fairly strong and fairly negative point about where the mining is done and how it is done. And it is pretty nasty when you really get down into the lithium and rare earth mining that's going on. And then the ultimate question, which I have, because this is my field of expertise from days gone by, the actual infrastructure of the electric system. And one thing that I probably have failed to account for so far, at least in my head, is that all of these cars charging in garages at night are part of the system, part of the grid. And there is storage there. So that's something that I need to have a better understanding, but he described it as a train wreck happening in slow motion if we don't have a fairly engineered and thoughtful approach to whatever transition lies ahead. Now, between this and Len's work that he's done over the last several months on some of the facts revolving around energy itself, I thought might be fairly interesting. So what are your thoughts, Matt, on the topic?
Well, I mean, this is a realistic article, right? I mean, some might say, well, he's got a vested interest, right, to slow things down or sort of drag their heels. I think it's a very practical statement, and it was interesting the audience he was talking to. But what I didn't see, and actually just went back to look because I hadn't thought, is, I mean, these are all sort of direct impediments, right? These are all engineering challenges, or let's say business challenges to it. I think you also have a matter of the whole insurance industry, right? The legal aspect of liability, and not for EVs, but let's say autonomous vehicles, which are coming on top of it, and in a lot of cases are the same. And certainly you can see it doesn't take you long in a YouTube search to look up Tesla crashes and understand that particularly when the the first mover or the biggest mover right now is aggressive in how they approach safety as opposed to traditional OEMs, that can become a bigger issue than normal. But then also civil engineering, right? Are our cities matched up for how EVs might have us drive? And that goes everything from and Ken, you said in the pre-show about looking at charging stations, right? So there's not just the availability of charging stations, but even the experience of charging stations, right? It used to have to stop for 2 hours to do it. And you say, well, that's a long dinner, maybe. This is when we stop. Now it's a half hour is pretty good. And, you know, can you get it down to the point where it's as convenient as filling up a gas tank? And then perhaps gas stations get more interesting. But also, even again, getting back more toward autonomous and electrical, parking, the sort of amount of space devoted to storing our cars might become entirely different if we're more moving into a service structure, or at least a structure where cars can go some distance more than what we want to walk to them when we go to the mall or go to the restaurant. So I mean, this is a big deal, and it's certainly much more realistic than some of the people doing hype. But I think even this just scratches the surface in terms of how society would change in a total change of the basic propulsion of cars.
I'm going to pile one more on top of the problems that we've already spoken about today, Mark, and ask where the funding comes from to keep our roads repaired if we move, wholeheartedly into electrical vehicles. We don't tax electricity to put money into the roads. We don't tax electricity to put money into the lighting system or the safety system or anything to do with transportation. That's coming from gas tax. And when that disappears, where does the funding come from? Who makes up that money that keeps those roads smooth? I mean, driving in Tennessee and Kentucky is completely different than driving in Michigan, where our roads are in terrible shape. And take the gas tax away, I'm asking myself, what the heck would those roads look like without the gas tax?
Yeah, there's.
I know.
Go ahead, Lynn.
When you have a battery electric vehicle, like my C-Max Energy that's sitting out in the garage, there is a surcharge on your license plate renewal for having a electric vehicle.
Does it match the amount of money that you would pay in gas tax, Lynn?
Hard to say. It depends on the specific vehicle you're talking about, I think, and what kind of fuel economy it gets.
I mean, without researching, I'm going to just ballpark gas taxes, contributing 15 to 25 cents per gallon to road construction, to transportation.
One of the slides that I think is later in the deck.
This one right here, I think, Lynn.
Next one or two. Nope, go back a couple. Guess you didn't put it in.
No, I grabbed what I could from the forum and just to make the point, but I think this one can make it a little bit.
Yeah.
Well, I know that those taxes, include the road tax, but they also include sales tax. A significant portion of that is sales tax in a lot of states.
Needless to say, that it's an offset situation that has to somehow be accounted for to continue to provide the infrastructure.
And I don't think we even think about that when we think about the electrical vehicles. After spending the last week in a place where there's more people and more cars than I'm used to, Natalie and I did a little bit of a search for charging stations. We were near Gatlinburg, Tennessee. We love the mountains. And we found a grand total of 8 charging stations within the city of Gatlinburg. 2 of them at a outside parking lot, and 6 of them at various indoor parking lots that were available.
Wow.
6 stations for literally thousands of cars that are going through that city on a regular day in the spring or summer or fall, you know.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the tip of the iceberg. I think, Matt, you'd recommended this slide, which shows kind of the far-reaching impact in a number of areas you might not necessarily think about.
Yeah, so I think it's 3 or 4 slides from a 2016 presentation from Deloitte. You can see Deloitte University Press down there. And so, I mean, some of the numbers have changed since then, although with 2 years scrambled of automotive production, it's probably not that far off. But I think all of the elements are there. And this first slide is, and I wish these were more interconnected, but it's kind of linear. You know, there are a lot of technologies you don't think about. Now, this is again going toward autonomous, not just electric vehicles, but a lot of technologies you might not associate with them. Take the middle one, connected vehicles. So 5G wireless communications is actually quite critical to running, let's say, a city full or a civilization full of autonomous vehicles. The typical autonomous vehicle, and I'll say this might be 3 years old data, generates about a petabyte an hour. And if you think about how many terabytes your laptop may have, I'll just say the most economical way to transmit that data is actually to FedEx hard drives overnight, right? Versus paying for the bandwidth that would send them. And the idea of having thousands of those through, of course, the engineering challenge is not all that information is useful, right? If you're transiting Nebraska east to west, and you don't see anyone for hours, it's not really useful data. You don't really have to send anything. But there's a lot of there's a lot of software, there's a lot of hardware processing on the vehicle to actually throw out irrelevant data as much as to figure out what's going on with the good data. And both in terms of getting help in that processing, so sending data to the cloud to process or to make the algorithms better, right, as they talk about AI development, but also car-to-car communications, right, being able to understand there's a crash just a few hundred feet ahead of you or even in progress, to understand the state of traffic signals and things, which is very important for a lot of European car makers. That cellular infrastructure is actually really critical. So that's one of those, but all of these things, there's a lot of convergence of technologies, and Mark talked about the very early electric cars. Of course, the other famous example is GM's EV1 in the 1990s. That was there and was sort of fully realized, but didn't take off. It isn't just what's inside the car that's made it sort of a moment that has a lot of people's imaginations captured and a lot of examples on the road even today. There's a lot of things around there too that means, maybe the third time is a charm if this is the third time, maybe this time for sure.
Mark, we have a hand in the air. It's Ann Manning, and I'm going to unmute Ann and let us hear what she has to ask or say, okay?
Absolutely.
Ann, you're unmuted. Go ahead.
Good afternoon. I was just going to say that I was talking to one of my neighbors yesterday. She's a top sales rep for a big drug company, and they're pushing to do all electric vehicles for their sales rep. And it started out, everybody's like, oh, this is great. And it works really well if you're in a big city. But some of these sales reps are going out to smaller cities or towns, and they're having trouble finding charging stations. So they wanted to turn their cars in because it wasn't working for them. And I think that's there's a lot of issues that they have to figure out how to fix this before we can all have, battery powered cars. I mean, what do you do with all these people that live like in apartment complexes? How many chargers are they going to have?
Mm-hmm.
So I think we're a long way from what, they're pushing this really hard, but I think we're a long way from being a society that we're all driving around in battery powered cars.
Well, that also just illustrates why a hybrid is a transitionary strategy, and it's necessary for what you just described.
Yeah, and I think that's more broadly put in as a potential rural urban divide, right? So what happens if we have all these what happens if it gets so automated that people are no longer getting driver's licenses, even because it's just a service you bring onto, and then they have to drive cross country, or as you said, Ann, I mean, get a charging station, or even get the car serviced, right? If it's a much bigger technical challenge, needing more equipment, more, let's say, computing power, not just wrenches. All of those things are challenges for rural areas. I mean, just like technology has before, right? You have the Rural Electrification Administration. I was just looking up. I think that the number of Americans still using dial-up internet is something in the tens of millions.
Wow.
Mark, could you back up one slide, please?
Sure.
Matt, I was wondering, and until you mentioned it, I wasn't going to say anything, but I was wondering if the fourth one of these maybe was speaking more to the rural internet, city divide than it was speaking about the generation, the way the generation thought.
Yeah, but same thing.
After all, more than 50% of people live in metropolitan areas now, large metropolitan areas, where a shared vehicle might be something that makes a lot of sense. I wonder, as you get more into the rural areas of the country, and there's a lot of them, how much sense a shared vehicle makes.
Right. Or how reliable it is, in a snowstorm out on a rural route or something like that.
Yeah, and I'm just wondering if that concept of shift in mobility preferences is as much a factor of where you live as much as what generation you're in.
Yeah, very, very good point, right? The density of and I mean, Gen Y was famous for preferring inner city, or revitalizing a lot of inner city areas going through,
Yep.
which of course reversed somewhat during the pandemic. So it'd be interesting to see what surveys now say with wherever people have settled since then.
Yeah, they've been
Well,
sharing bikes for a while, so it's probably something that's translatable. All right. Well,
and not only where they live, Matt, but whether they've got to the point where they have children or not, too. That makes a big difference on your philosophy about shared ride systems.
Absolutely.
Well, that makes me want to get out the bike with the 12 people on it in Singapore. All right. And then Matt, I think this one makes the point of, far-reaching impact.
Yeah, so let me put some numbers around this. So these are 2014 figures, even though this is a 2016 deck, and I'll put a couple more figures on it because I know we've talked about it in a few prior conversations. So the total estimated population of motor vehicles in the world in 2019 is 1.4 billion. And the global automotive industry produced a little over 79 million last year. So those years don't match up, but so I do think this is a little bit less than the full globe's impact. If you think about that, that'd be 15,000 a year per car, and that might be hard to put together. But yeah, so we think about, first of all, you think about if a company was gonna grab this entire pie, might it be worth $1 trillion? To leave them nameless, right? What would the valuations be on here? But you think about the green dot on top is actually the OEMs, right? The auto industry. We've been talking recently in the forum at Len's behest, kind of at 5 o'clock or 4 o'clock. The energy industry, right, is on top of that, and what does electricity do? What changes do they have to make to go from direct gas supply to energy supply in a different way, being mainly the electric grid. But as I mentioned, right above there is insurance, right? You think about not only in the case of autonomous vehicles where Tesla's driving your car or someone's driving your car, but even you have a very high energy device in your car. If you've seen some of those evidence of crashes and seen a battery lose its integrity, there are challenges for that. But then at the very bottom, as Ken talked about, right, you have public sector, right? There is the fuel taxes and the auto sales taxes and licensing, right? That's as big as the insurance industry in terms of a funding need or a change, right? Is it toll roads? Is it, as several people have mentioned in the question box. There are several states, and I think early on states didn't add to their licensing fees for EVs as a kind of incentive, right? You could save money by not paying gas tax. I think they're now to the point in certain areas where there are enough of them that they're feeling the pinch, and so they're now treated more rationally, meaning just what Ken said, we need a replacement for that. And then medical and legal. I think medical and legal is probably the fuzziest number here. It's hard to say. I know I'm a big fan of Luminar. And I do own Luminar as a lidar supplier on many levels. But you know, they have explicitly said not only from their mottos, but given their first customers, Volvo, you know, they want to eliminate accidents. And how much would it be worth to you to a car that is, let's say, 95% less likely to get into a crash as any car you would drive? That could be worth something. But it goes all around, right? So it's a big complex problem, if you call it a problem, to try and change or to try and predict what the change will mean, to cover all the bases. So this takes that same sort of groupings and then is putting some words around what those changes may be. And you can see on the bottom that kind of green box of societal benefits, right? So we're looking at decreasing emissions, and of course you have to, you know, there's an asterisk there. You have to think about that's not just burning less gasoline on the road. You have to think about, well, we mined all these exotic materials to get the batteries and then put them together and whatnot. But 32,000 lives saved, and again, I think that's very fuzzy. I think the potential is more than that. Auto accidents are still one of the leading causes of death in the U.S., and certainly there are fewer safeguards in vehicles in the developing world than in the U.S., so I'd have to think that opportunity is at least proportionate to the world population. But then on the right is where I always think about Google. Why would Google start Waymo? What are they looking for? Well, until Google can own your sleep, for most people, most working people, the commute is the longest amount of time where they are not searching on the internet for something, whether that's, you know, viewing YouTube ads or shopping online or doing something else. For Google, getting you in an autonomous vehicle is not just about selling you the autonomous vehicle or the service. It frees you up to use all their other services too, like you do every other minute of your day.
Wonderful point.
But I mean, these are otherwise kind of hard to read, so they're probably better as a reference. But if you're investing or thinking of investing in some of these other industries and wondering what does electrification mean to me or autonomous vehicles mean to me, some of these points may be thought starters.
Absolutely.
Matt, can you tell us the significance of the red, yellow, orange color on the dots? Any
Sure.
significance
The key is in. I mean, it's a dense slide. The key is above the ambulance there. So bright red means you create value. The sort of salmon or pink color is actually diminishing value, so it might be a challenge to go through. And then yellow is mixed impact. So positive, negative, and
There it is. Okay.
And neutral, not neutral, but plus and minus.
Yep.
Okay.
Neat stuff. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
One comment before we leave that last slide.
Sure. Go ahead, Len.
It's totally focused on cars and does not address all of the other fossil fuel powered vehicles like trucks, delivery trucks, buses, construction equipment, farming equipment.
We could go back one slide. I do think some of that is in the transportation box. Well, it's taxis and limos, but you're right.
Again, you know, I don't see the heavy duty trucks.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see the intermediate duty trucks. I don't see the light duty trucks. I don't see the specialty vehicles.
Farm vehicles, Len.
Yeah.
Well, I was thinking fire engines.
Yeah.
Even just think about the shift to natural gas in much of the long-term logistics firms. They're just getting into that. So it really is a complicated question.
Yep.
There's got to be opportunity.
So there might be a couple questions out of here. So Thomas Brooks brings up, what about added stress on the electrical grid and that infrastructure? Certainly that's in the energy space. Now, Mark hinted at that, right? And in some ways, cars, I mean, certainly it's more users, but if it's done right, they may actually help the infrastructure in a way, in the sense that if you're driving your car, if you're driving your electric car with 300-mile range, you're probably rarely driving it to zero. And to the point that cars are otherwise sitting around, if they're connected to the grid, they can both charge, that means take energy from the grid, or also supply energy to the grid. Something like having solar panels on your house. So that's really one way, but you can have house batteries too, and you can kind of go both ways. Now there's a long way to figuring out what's the best way to do it, but that would be a way to manage it.
Yeah,
And then, go ahead.
I was just going to point out, when you hear people talking about smart grids, they're talking about managing that situation, among other things. But
yeah, that's one of the elements for sure. Yeah, because I mean there are entire cases too for the grid to have batteries, and we had a forum discussion on that too, on the iron air batteries,
yes.
right? Which are not car batteries, because we don't want cars that weigh 10 tons. But are appropriate at scale and are very good at discharging over long times. So there's a whole set of battery technologies for the grid itself to sort of help manage, and that's nothing about autonomous vehicles. That's managing how intermittent solar and wind might be.
I think we should dig into that iron battery technology and investment opportunity as a standalone topic too.
Mm-hmm. And then
right,
Susan Steen also talked about, I don't seem to hear how charging stations are supplied with electricity and how much that will cost, or the relative cost for electricity itself. Now, there's an interesting idea when you think how. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, with the reports of the potential for roving blackouts this summer, if you have a electric only car, that sounds totally scary.
Yeah,
sure.
I'm thinking back to when the grid collapsed, and I think it was 2003, and we were sitting here for how many weeks with going back to the past.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. All right, let's go ahead and wrap up, Len. I'd like you just to give the quick version of some of your concerns about the fuel side of this. We'll run a little bit late today, but I think it's worth it as an introduction.
Where I was coming from with this one, and why I felt you should be aware of it, that the direct cost, the abstract for this article is that the farmer used to be able to fuel his tractor for $500 to go out and work the fields for a day, and now it's $1,000, and you're seeing it in the prices of. I think what I quoted on the forum was in milk and eggs. That milk used to be under $2 a gallon, and now it's in my Kroger's it's $3.79. Some of that may have been a lost leader, but you're starting to see the impact.
Mm-hmm.
And this is just to educate you that a barrel of oil doesn't equate to 42.7 gallons of gasoline, because the barrel has 42.7 gallons in it, and 43 gallons, whatever it is. And all of the things that are made, it's like, did you ever wonder where asphalt comes from? Notice down there, 4% of the yield from that barrel of crude is the asphalt that we use to make roads with. If you don't have crude oil, what are you going to do for roads?
Part of the question. It's a good slide.
That's one of the possible questions you have to ask, and it's like the jet fuel, the aircraft fleets. Without fuel, there'd be a lot more of them in the aircraft graveyards.
Yeah, and I was surprised that the diesel to regular gasoline split was that close, really.
Yeah, and as I think I commented, they can swing the yield between gasoline and diesel about 10% in the refinery.
Right.
That comes from the father of my ex-supervisor, among other relationships with him. We teamed up for a master's degree in combustion and emissions at Wayne State. But his father was the maintenance supervisor at the Marathon Refinery in Detroit. So.
Wow. We've used this one a little bit.
Just a quick comparison of the cost associated with a gallon of gasoline and a gallon of diesel.
Right. I did add a couple of other slides just to kind of underscore the points made by Carlos earlier on from Stellantis. Now, that is a picture from one of the rare metal fields in China. And then that also underscoring this notion of solar panels taking over quite a few acres out there, and they do wear out and end up in a graveyard. And it's not often not thought through on the full systems of impact to what's actually going on here.
Yep.
Not to mention that the vast majority of that hardware comes from China right now.
Yep.
Ken, did you want to save your comment on the solar panels for the next session we do?
Yeah, let's save it, Mark. Yeah.
Okay. Let's go ahead and wind down just again. This slide, again, very busy slide, just demonstrating that there's a whole lot that goes into this. We've talked about charging stations and a variety of things, and it's a complicated topic. That's all it's meant by this slide, that there's multiple considerations that need to be pumped through. With that, I'm going to go down and close this down on my absolute lunacy slide, my audacious trade. And Ken, if you want to leave the room, you can. Referring to this as my tequila moment, inspired by thinking on the Cinco de Mayo. And it is a trade. And I promised myself that if I ever saw the stars align with a low relative strength index and the NASDAQ 100 stocks being relatively undervalued, in combination with volume that you see on the far right there, that I would basically enter into a position on this triple Q investing vehicle. And I'm actually using a leap to do it, one of those long-term equity appreciation products. And I actually did double down today at a price slightly below what I bought a couple of weeks ago. And the other flip side to the story is that I actually spent a fair amount of time talking to a young man who graduated from McDaniel this past weekend. He's been trading options for 8 years. And it was kind of fascinating to sit and listen to him talk about the underlyings and how much work he does on understanding the actual stocks that are being invested in. And he's going to be a wealthy man someday, just after spending that half hour with him. Good stuff. All right, quick reminder, we do archive all this stuff on YouTube on the Manifest Investing channel. There are some shorts there, but you can also retrieve roundtables, bull sessions, some of our educational themes. Our recent celebrating workhorses, those medium-sized companies, has been well received. And encourage you to go there and subscribe so you know whenever we add content, and that's a pretty good session. And then, Ken, we had a squirrel in your absence last week, and I added this one just as a reminder that we do convene a week from today with our round table.
All right.
All right. So, any closing thoughts, guys?
Interesting conversation today, Mark. Very interesting conversation.
Yeah,
I
a lot
do-
of fun. Thank you.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
do want to see us come back and tackle companies like Little Fuse, which is doing very well, by the way, since it was brought to the roundtable, and other specific companies that I think are worth our attention. And we probably do need to talk lithium in greater detail. So with that, I think we can go ahead and shut down. I apologize for the sound quality. Hopefully it wasn't too bad. And I will be back to normal when the FedEx man gets here shortly. All right. Any
Have a good
further?
afternoon, everybody.
All right. Take care, everybody. Good luck out there.
Stay safe.